usually do this with guests. I am going to say what I want to talk about because there's so much that I don't want to forget
Okay.
something. So if we come to the end of it and we're like, wait, we didn't talk about that, because I usually don't have so many notes like this, but I don't want to miss anything. So before you even say anything, I'm going to tell you what
Sure.
it is. It's kind of your background with flavor, your role as an educator, and how that's different maybe from behind the
Yeah.
bar or someone who's written books, your role as a book writer, and your role as a recipe creator for someone whose drinks are known for, like, and these are your words, layers of complexity, and how that differs from writing ones for your
Yes.
book. And the book itself. So we'll go through the book itself a little. I'll bring it down because I want everyone to see those wonderful
Wonderful.
illustrations.
Thank you. That sounds great.
All right. Oh, great. And if there's something there you don't want to talk about, that's
No,
fine.
no,
We'll do
no.
that
All
too.
gone.
We won't
Yeah.
do that, should I say? All right. So I guess, you know what I noticed so number one, a friend called me while I was reading your book, which I have behind me. And I was like, I can't talk to you now. I have to make your fireside flip. And I was like, it really made me want to reach out and grab ingredients and start to make things. So as someone who reads a lot of these kind of books, I was like, I'll talk to you later. I got to keep reading because these are great recipes.
Oh, that's really wonderful to hear.
And reading the book, I noticed you have a lot of books. So you published one in 2015. That was Good Things to Drink with Mr. Lyan and Friends. You published one in 2017, Good Together, Drink and Feast with Mr. Lyan and Friends. And then you have this wonderful reprint, which or a new
Yes.
edition in 2023 for maybe your 10th anniversary. And I noticed that you dedicated one to your
Yes.
sister and one to your family, but specifically
Yeah.
your mom. And I was wondering if maybe you could talk about your relationship with them in terms of the household and your upbringing and kind of your relationship to
Yeah,
flavor.
of course. I mean, obviously, there's lots of other people on that list who've made kind of a big impact on me, and kind of from a family perspective, it was very lovely to have so much influence come from both, my dad, my brother, people that I count as family, and in kind of other ways. But I think there was something very specific about the impact that my sister Natasha and my mum Buddy kind of created on me from, I suppose, a joy perspective. And, the thing that I'd always been trying to explore was, from a multitude of different interests and, things that I wanted to be able to kind of keep as part of my life. When it came to the kind of like work output and the focus on the food and drink world, both Mum and Natasha had probably had the kind of biggest impact. And I think what they had done to kind of spark my kind of intrigue around it, but also, I suppose, to look at it in a more holistic way, was really key. And that's why I wanted to dedicate the book to those in kind of various ways. Because, we grew up, Mum kind of taught us about flavour. She taught us about kind of like the practicalities of cooking. She taught us about kind of techniques. We were trained to be very adept from quite a young age. We were cooking from when we were tiny.
And wait, I'm
Yeah,
interrupting
please.
you. What kind of cooking? All right, where were you born, and like what kind of cooking are we talking about?
So this was kind of being raised in Birmingham. So despite
Okay.
being kind of born to kind of Sinhalese parents, we were brought up with, I suppose, quite Western cooking. There was a couple of other influences that came in. My oldest friend is half Chinese. We had some very close friends who were Chinese Malaysian who just lived up the road from us. So I suppose the other big kind of flavor influence in my life, more so than Sri Lankan, was actually Chinese growing up. And I think that was the thing that I used to play a lot of sport and do some music, and that was Chinese food was the accompaniment to that. I suppose it was almost the bribe when we were kind of going to do things as kids, and parents wanting us to do lots of extracurricular activities, very classically Asian parents. And they kind of enticed us with the idea of kind of Chinese food, and being able to go to kind of like our favorite restaurants, or go to friends' houses, or for Mum to cook those kind of foods as well. So I grew up in Birmingham, but I grew up around quite diverse flavors, but strangely not around kind of Sinhalese or Sri Lankan flavors when we were young. Partly because I think our parents were very keen for us to assimilate. I think they had a very different journey into the UK when, they, I suppose, arriving from Sri Lanka, and kind of, I suppose, their worries about what that would be for kids growing up, and wanting to make sure that felt kind of as home as possible. But I think it's also because we just couldn't handle the heat. We couldn't do spicy food. So, Sri Lankan food was fiercely spicy. And I remember when we visited for the first time as kids, just not being able to eat anything in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lankan kind of food and culture is something I've definitely kind of embraced as I've become an adult. It wasn't a major part of our kind of culinary journey growing up. So actually...
no,
sorry, please.
Sorry. Were you in there cooking with your mom? I mean, was this something that you knew that you were going to, from those early days, knew you were going to go play with as an adult?
Oh, no, not at all. It was very much done from we were kind of taught that you had to learn how to do that. You had to be able to look after yourself, but also it was something you did as a family activity. It was a social thing. It was something to do with kind of looking after each other. So it was... it definitely was kind of ingrained in us from a young age, but not in any way that it was kind of, designed to shape what we're going to do next. I think there was probably one Sri Lankan influence that we were baking cakes a lot from a young age. And if you go to a Sri Lankan household, there is a guarantee that a cake is going to appear from somewhere. So I think there was that influence. But also I think, whenever we were going to kind of friends' parties, Mum would always insist on, on making something. That was partly from a cost perspective, it wasn't about just going out and buying things. It was, our parents were very frugal when we were young and, trying to do the best with whatever they could. And, we definitely made a lot of presents. We baked cakes. If it was if we were having friends around, we would kind of like create things. And, it definitely taught us the value of making, but also of that kind of consideration. So that's definitely kind of been ingrained in all of us as we've grown, and we've applied it in different ways. But, it was very much this idea that food was a social tool, and it was a way of kind of looking after people and showing care. So I think that was something that really got ingrained in, and into me, particularly when I was, thinking about what I wanted to do next. It was kind of guided by this. And, even when I started in kitchens and then switched to bars, I think it was really kind of shaped by, the way that we had been brought up to kind of think on food, not as just something that was purely sustenance, not something that was kind of the dish itself. It was more about the idea of it being an act of love or a social kind of tool, really.
Well, I've read that you studied biology, that you studied fine arts. Were you thinking of having a career in both of those, or one of those, and then something deflected you, to the world of flavor and kitchens and then behind bars?
I mean, originally food and then drink was very much my background to kind of fun studies. So as I was going through from, art college through, I was really doing it because I loved the social aspect of being in those environments. And I wanted to kind of like, be able to have a little bit of extra fun while I was at university. So being able to be in kind of like a bar setting was amazingly social, and it was great for kind of being able to fund the fun of university. But actually, I think the point came when I turned around. I switched from doing fine art to biology because I think it was being reflected in my work. The work I was doing, I never really divided arts and sciences. And while I was at art college, I really was doing things that felt quite scientific. And I remember having a great discussion with my tutor on kind of my fine art rotation. I had my place to do fine art, and I was speaking to her, and she came from a academic background, and she kind of went, well, listen, it really feels like you need to still kind of explore something and get it off your chest. You can always have that kind of creative output. It seems like you're kind of craving these kind of more academic studies. So I went up to Edinburgh to study biology, and it was still all about people. That was the thing that intrigued me about it. But there was something in the kind of point where I was going through the kind of academic world, and I remember turning to my dad and asking him, because as I kind of went into doing philosophy from biology, I remember saying, I know I don't want to be in kind of research at the end of this. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was always trying to find this balance of kind of arts and sciences, and I was intrigued by people, so that was the kind of motivation behind all those studies. But I remember turning to him, and he's like, listen, the key thing is you don't want to get to a certain point in your life and go down a specific path and realize you hate it. So if you need to make these choices now, this is a good time to change. And like I feel internally grateful for kind of that advice and that support, and it was support from all angles. It was kind of financial, it was kind of emotional, it was just being able to have that kind of I suppose trust, to be able to kind of think and shift dynamic. So even by the time I suppose I eventually graduated, I was doing my master's when I first won UK Bartender of the Year, and I was traveling back and forth to London from Edinburgh. And I it was very clear to me at this point that I was going to kind of end up in bartending. But I remember, I suppose, kind of telling my dad, that was like, that's where I think I'm going to be. And he was like, listen, if you found something you love and you feel like you can kind of make a career out of this. And I think it did help that I was starting to get some kind of traction. It wasn't just the kind of bar work alongside kind of university life. And I think the main worry for a parent is if you're going to end up starving on the street. And I think because my sister had paved the way as like being a very successful designer, and she'd gone through what my parents didn't really realize could be a kind of career. She'd kind of I suppose kind of eased the kind of path for me to be able to go, well, I'm going to do something quite untraditional, but it's not going to leave me starving.
I love that. Now, while you were studying, you said you were becoming well known as a bartender. What was it about the bar world that really drew you in? Was it the social aspect? Was it being, a scientist? What kind of thing was it?
It was a bit of all of those. I think it was amazing to me where I had this opportunity to kind of explore both the science and the art side of my interests. And it was, this wonderful idea to me that, I never divided them. I always saw them as the same thing. But being able to have an output and to be able to have a career that allowed me to kind of find my own space within it and look at it from both those angles and include that without it being, I never tried to make things feel scientific or, tried to do things that are like, this is a art movement or anything like that. It was just using the, I suppose, the thinking behind each of those routes to try and explore something new in the world of kind of food and drink. But it really was the social aspect that brought it to life for me. It was the people I met. And, the thing that I've always loved about the food and drink world, I think, there is inevitably something quite, like there's an immense satisfaction out of making people happy. There is something that if you're a person that kind of enjoys that kind of, that act, and that's your way of expression, then I think it feels incredibly fulfilling. And I think that's quite a universal thing. I definitely recommend, this is part of the big steer in the books, is to think about it as an act of love rather than kind of like a prescriptive, these are the formulae or the recipes you need to learn. But it was also the people I met. It became this incredibly diverse set of people that were doing very interesting things, had come from such a wide range of backgrounds, but were joined by this idea of kind of going, right, we make people happy. And the ways in which we do that are very different. We can express our characters, we can be ourselves. There was nothing that felt kind of rigid about it. And I think that was something that I knew I needed. Not that I'm kind of, anarchic in the way that I can't follow rules, but I definitely, like the idea of kind of individual expression and being able to be yourself rather than, just being a, generic part of something. So being able to be part of an industry that celebrated that felt kind of magical to me. It kind of almost felt like I'd stumbled on something that, didn't make sense. And, I suppose the motivation for me in any career was never money or anything like that. So finding something where I was working with amazing people, I felt satisfied from both a kind of creative, a social, a excitement level. It kind of really did feel like I'd stumbled across something that was, a bit of a secret trade. And it just fit perfectly.
And you hit the ground running with, with success after success. I mean, as I said, we could be here for 5 hours talking. But I really want to focus on your role kind of as an educator, because you've brought out these books and you've done some wonderful things. I mean, I know that I'm not alone in having you in my living room every single night during lockdown.
Oh, that's wonderful.
With Masterclass and starting, even though you had written your first book in 2015, your second book 2017, I think you became this household figure with Lynette, as Masterclass hit. And, as lockdown hit and Masterclass, fabulous timing. I know I just sat there. It was I can't even say guilty pleasure. It was just pleasure, pleasure every day, really. And I think a lot of people felt that and, really discovered Masterclass with these. Like, I know my audience for my blog went up 1,300% during lockdown. Yeah. So people had cocktails on their mind. And I kind of want to discuss that, your role, having bars. You have so many successful bars, a few of the menus I have behind me from these bars. And so you're constantly educating. You're not only educating your other bar staff to create your vision of your bars, but also the public. And I was wondering kind of how you see the difference, or if there is a difference, and kind of how you approached Masterclass, how you approached your first few books, and also while, talking about centrifuges, which we don't really have with your, and sous vide machines with your staff.
I think there definitely, in some ways, there was a massive difference between kind of that trade education and the consumer, but ultimately the things that it boiled down to were very similar. And that's, I suppose, was the motivation behind the books and certainly the Masterclass series. And, it was about relevance. And, I think some of the things that we do in the bars, they are there to be exciting for people. That's what they want them to be. They want to feel accessible. And, we work so hard on kind of like giving the team the freedom to be able to be themselves and connect people to these kind of weird and wonderful things that we do in each of the spaces. But it never seemed, as much as I would like at some stage to do a book that was kind of more geared up to, the professional or the ultra geek who is willing to go, okay, cool, I'm going to do these series of fermentations, I'm going to do these 50 steps to be able to make this, or I'm going to take the 3 weeks of background work to be able to make this ingredient. But that's not what, as somebody who loves making cocktails at home, I was never going to do that at home. So it was really, I wanted to be able to demonstrate that cocktails were magic. It was the fundamental of them, and it doesn't need to be something ultra complicated. It can be very, very simple. Making a great gin and tonic can be magical. And, how can you demonstrate the learnings that we had kind of acquired from kind of being in the industry for 2 decades and, seeing ways of which we could put things together, make people happy and connect them to it. How could we teach those lessons? And, the idea with the books was to kind of really make it, that's why we use very plain language. It was about how do we look at the practicalities, understanding of the emotions, and think on the way that these kind of flavors resonate, or these styles of drink kind of connect to a certain moment or occasion or that feeling, and kind of help guide people around that kind of mentality. And, it was wonderful seeing, the success of the books and seeing people actually use them. But as you say, it was just very serendipitous timing with the launch of the Masterclass series. But I think people realized when, the pandemic hit, they were at home, not only did they miss, the excitement of something like a cocktail, there was something that felt kind of really special about it. I think they really understood the importance of bars and getting together and that social aspect and what a cocktail could do to help really reinforce that moment. And so I think there was something like really special about, yes, people went and learned how to make sourdough or did very complicated recipes. And, I have a friend who decided to try and make ramen at home, which is incredibly ambitious. But, there was something about a cocktail with the instant gratification, the fact that it felt social, even if you were connecting over a digital platform, but also the fact that it just, it created this sense of togetherness. And, it was something to be shared. It was something to cheers. It was a little bit of kind of like escapism as well. And so teaching people that, they could make something their own, they could gift it to people, they could send it, they could kind of reflect their personalities in something that's very different to the function of cooking. It was purposefully there to feel like joy. And, there was something really nice about seeing the success of those series and people kind of engaging with that type of education, because that's the stuff that I always like to teach, even if I'm talking to a specialist trade audience. I'm going, yes, all of these things are tools, like being able to use these pieces of equipment or these types of flavors or express through these kind of like storytelling narratives. That's all a tool. What we're trying to do is create emotion for our guests and understand like an element that they haven't quite cottoned onto yet, so we can anticipate a need, reflect it, and for them to be able to leave happier than when they came into our spaces. So it's all about trying to think on the same sentiments. But there was something really nice about kind of empowering a home bartender who didn't have that wealth of knowledge or hadn't had that experience to go, wow, I can understand my palate in a different way. I can start to think on, the favorite flavors that I use in my cooking, or I know I bring into my house, or, the things that I've, collected over the years. But even helping them discover a new side of their favorite ingredients and showing how they can fold that into things that kind of help their kind of moments together with their friends and family feel more magical. Because it was kind of motivated originally by, I'd have friends who would ask about a certain infusion, or they would go, I need to be able to get a recipe for making, it was a friend who asked me for a margarita recipe, and they said, I think they said there was like 30 friends coming over for a brunch, and they were like, can you give me a margarita recipe? And I was like, I can, but that's a terrible idea, because this is a drink that only sings when you've shaken it up, or you've got a slushy machine that can kind of get it ideal, and you're putting all of this care into it to get it precise. You're going to be squeezing limes, and you're going to be shaking up drinks. You're going to be sticky and stuck in the kitchen for the whole time. You're not going to enjoy brunch with your friends. What you could do is, if you've got 30 people going, this drink would be ideal for it. It would, give the same sentiment. You could have something that's not going to get people too knocked out on booze, and it's going to work for a brunch environment. It's going to work alongside the food that you're serving. And I remember them just going, I never had even thought about these things. I just liked margaritas. I was like, I get it. Right. And then I get why you want something that feels fresh and uplifting. This is going to do all those things for you, but it's going to mean that you can have a good time over this rather than get locked in the kitchen. And just those kind of little insights, and then the comments back about how great a time they had, how much people commented on it, but actually just, it was like, this was a wonderful day that we had as a result of this. And those moments are what I think cocktails can help really bolster. So the books were really trying to go, well, this is different to somebody coming into the bar and us talking through it and having that intimate connection. It's about how do you empower people to then take on those ideas and make it their own. And that's what's been so wonderful to watch with kind of putting these things out into the world compared to the kind of difference of having people come into the bars.
Oh, absolutely. Two things while you were talking that I thought of was that I just wanted to say that while watching Masterclass, why it was so fun for me is I've been lucky enough to come to some of your, not all of your bars, but at least the London ones. And so I felt during lockdown that I was actually there. It took me away. Yeah. And that was such a lovely thing to be able to go, okay, I can, even though I've never seen you behind the bar there, but I was like, I can imagine, Aiden Bowie behind the bar making a drink. I can imagine my friend Alfonso, being there. So that was really, really joyful. But about the books, you're saying, and of course I should have realized this, this having been your first book, that it could have been the nerdiest book ever. You could have gone pure scientist as your first book and been like, look how smart I am. And it's such a joy that you created something that has literally your name and friends on it. It always has and friends. Yeah. And also this is your other book, it's and friends. And that sense of community is what drove you to create these.
Absolutely. And those are the things that ultimately I've loved about drinks. Sometimes you do want to share it with just kind of one other, or you've had a long day and you want something that feels like a hug to be able to kind of like hunker down with alongside some food. It's, of course there's those moments, but where they really start to kind of come into their own is when you realize how much they enable more of a social gathering. And that doesn't need to be a big raucous party, but it can be. It's, everything in between that and just you having a lovely evening in by yourself. It's, it's being able to try and think on exactly that. The fact that it should be beyond a temple to the cocktail. It's about kind of everything around the glass as well as what's inside it. And that's always excited me, is because it's, the best. I used to think about every time I spoke to friends, particularly who aren't in the trade, and you ask them what their favourite night out was or their favourite meal. And yes, they might talk about something they tried, but that's the excitement of it. They're not going into the flavours of the dish. They're talking about what it enabled them to do with the people that they were with. And that's really what I wanted to kind of help kind of encourage is, okay, these are all the things that we've thought on of being in the industry for a long time. This is going to help you have those better moments with your friends and family, those things that become much more memorable. And, it very much was a very natural thing of, I got together my friends and family, I made the things that I would have made for them during those moments, and we took photos of it. It was, it was a very honest kind of reflection of those things, but it was, it wasn't trying to be like, well, these are the flavors that I like, you have to like them. It was going, these are a blueprint, they're not prescriptive. You take these recipes, the idea is you get an understanding of the balance and why they work in these settings, and then feel kind of like empowered to kind of take them on in your own direction. So whatever flavors you love, wherever you are in the world, there are ways in which you can then take these drinks and make them your own. And that to me was what was kind of like most exciting about it, rather than just, as you say, demonstrating, like something about how clever we've been about a certain technique or something like that.
Now saying that, now we're going to get really nerdy
Sure.
in the book. So I'm bringing it down. And this is why we're doing video. By the way, I have to bring down the Lyaness menu too, because these are not, you talked about some of the ingredients, and this is like one of my favorites with the purple pineapple, and the infinite banana is, one of my favorites of all time. But we're going to put that aside. You have to go to Lyaness to try these.
I love that you have that. That's
now,
I think that was the second menu for Lyaness.
It was the second menu, yes, because I was invited to the tasting of the second menu. But number one, everything that you create is so beautiful. And I love, and it was a surprise that these were your illustrations, because I didn't know beforehand about your fine arts background. And I'm just going to show, they are just
Oh, that's very kind, because it was kind of like a funny one with the team, because, having actually done...
I just love that.
Yeah, it's... I grew up, I suppose my main medium when I was kind of going into fine art was drawing, and I went through a different phase. I went through one stage of doing kind of photorealistic drawing, and quite young got quite bored of that, and then went way more abstract and conceptual. But I can draw, and like I remember Ian turning to me, he was just like, it's basically like a child wrote and drew these. And but I actually took that as a real compliment, because it was about the clarity of it, the simplicity of stripping things away, rather than something that felt overly complex. It wanted to feel quite straightforward, and so doing it in an illustrative way was really fun.
The only thing that I missed was, I loved the frontispiece and this little.
Oh,
cat.
yes.
Okay, that's not in the new one, so you have to buy this book as well, everyone. You have to buy Good Together to get the little cat, so they know what I'm talking about. But, all right, I'm just going to go through the book, because I think it's kind of fun to see. Now, I know Eric from Modern Bar Cart well, and of course I listened to his interview with you. And he said that you, actually, he had gone to one of your lectures, and he had notes from it, and that... I was wondering if he talked about MAT, mouthfeel, aroma, and taste. And I was wondering if that's true, that you kind of use that MAT idea with all of the cocktails in here. Is it something that it's just kind of ingrained in you, this idea of every single cocktail has to have all these three, the mouthfeel, aroma, and taste?
Absolutely. I mean, it's some things it's there in the balance, and it's kind of less kind of foot forward, and then some it's a little bit more overt. So there's ones where we are trying to kind of bolster the texture, and you do these. This is one of the reasons why I love teaching classic cocktails is, some of these things are inherent within some of these drinks that people know very well. If you think on the shape of a highball glass, the aperture's there designed not to kind of dissipate the bubbles too much, but it stacks up the ice so it kind of stays chilled, so it drinks differently from the top to the bottom. And so you're kind of controlling all of these aspects to do with the journey of the drink, the mouthfeel, the aromas, and the kind of weight, and all of those aspects of it. But you're doing it kind of inherently to those cocktails. Other times, when you're thinking on occasion, you're trying to kind of really push the effect that those can have. So when you're looking to something that feels a little bit more end of evening, you want things that have a kind of rounder, richer texture, that kind of hold the flavors in a slightly kind of different manner, and they unfold as they kind of change as you drink it. Other times you're kind of pushing the emotions of something that feels really crisp and aperitif style, and you want stuff that has that kind of bracing acidity or minerality or any of those things. And actually the book kind of again, I didn't want it to be too prescriptive, but it kind of follows a journey from lighter to darker. So as you start at the beginning of the chapters, there are those occasions that you want something that feels a little bit more uplifting, or those are literally those moments where you gather at a kind of brighter point in the day or the emotional sphere. And then as it goes through, it starts to track richer and darker in those moments where you do want something that feels a little bit more kind of richer end of evening. And, within those, there are moments where we're kind of like pulling out the text in a different way. You talked about the fireside flip. It's very much that as a kind of thinking, the name's implied. It's kind of, you want something that feels a little cozy. It's using the kind of richness of kind of the kind of egg to be able to give that kind of, carries the flavors in a different way. It gives a different kind of texture. It gives a little real kind of body to it. And then it's using things like the kind of ginger and the nutmeg to give that association of, that first aroma that you're going to get that feels very much kind of reminiscent of those moments where you have something that's a bit comforting, that is a little bit more kind of deep and brooding. So it's, there are certainly kind of moments where we kind of reflect that idea in a more overt way, but actually it's kind of trying to teach people to kind of include that thinking at every element of what they create, because those are the things that can help kind of push that sentiment or like emotion in a kind of really directed way.
Oh boy, yes. No, it's for a cocktail that has, or for, I guess, a food, if you want to call it, something that we imbibe, something that we drink that has so few ingredients. There's so much. Yeah. There's so much in it. I mean, it's so much in it. It's hard not to get kind of nerdy about it when you want to make something good.
Yeah, and
obviously when you want it to be good.
Totally. And I think this is one of the lovely things about teaching about the drinks. It's to demonstrate your care into it. That's ultimately when a drink goes from being something like fine to something magnificent. And when somebody's shown that care, and it's little things. This is why we always talk about like having the right amount of ice, or like pre-chilling glassware, or kind of making sure that your sodas or your tonics are very well chilled so they're crisp enough and they're fresh and they're getting all of that effervescence. Honestly, some of the most I think I keep a very wide definition of a cocktail, because to me it's not about the number of ingredients or the techniques you've applied to do it. It's about the care. And I always say, if you can serve somebody the right wine in the right glassware for that moment, and you create that connection and that anticipation and delivery of it, and it goes on the right arc because you've served the right volume of it, that's a cocktail. But it doesn't need to be like I've got this wine and it's from this region, I'm using this Riedel glass to reflect this varietal. It's not anything about that. It's about making sure that it feels like you've put the care and consideration in it. If you serve somebody that, some of the best drinks I've had have been at people's, houses or bars where they've done something that feels very idiosyncratic to them. It's their favorite way of serving something, and you buy into that and you just feel taken care of, and that drink automatically feels one of the most wonderful things in the world. And so it's about teaching this care and, being able to notice those differences of texture and aroma, or realizing that if you, change the temperature of this, it changes the whole kind of profile of the drink. And those little moments can become some of the kind of most wonderfully empowering kind of bits of insight. And they give people so much more kind of freedom to run off and do their own drinks than, learning all of the specs and details of a particular type of spirit and all of the cocktails from a certain place or whatever it might be. So it's definitely about that education on a much more fundamental level and that kind of like deeper level, rather than it is just about kind of gathering together all of the information and learning all the facts.
No, absolutely. And what I love is that every recipe, and I think you led me to this so well, has that in it, because every recipe has not only the method but the magic.
Yeah.
And I love that. And that is, I feel like what you've just talked about, that is the magic.
Yes, it is. And it's those little bits of care, and it's trying to get people to notice something different, but also encourage them to think on substitutions or ways in which they can make it their own. And it is, like, again, that's why I wanted to use language that I very much use in my usual way of talking. It's not trying to be anything like too fancy. It's trying to be as honest as possible. And yeah, like it was nice to be able to kind of highlight those little bits of info or those little facts, those little bits of magic that again do kind of help people kind of really take ownership of their drinks in a different way.
Exactly. And all right, we're going to go from big picture to very small picture in the book. I love that and I would love to know the reason why, because it just threw me that you have a bit about the staples you should have in your house. One is Angostura bitters, Campari, triple sec, or fruit liqueur. But then you throw in absinthe.
Yes.
And I'm like, whoa, that's not like, gin.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like absinthe. This is a thing that, maybe a lot of Americans, I think I don't even know if it's still illegal in the States, Why did you throw in absinthe?
Well, it's partly around the stories around it. I think there's so much myth around this as a product that I think it's kind of important to dispel some of that and go, listen, it's a very wonderful product with a very rich history. It's not something that you should be terrified of, or that it's going to make you cut off your ear, or all the other things that I've heard around it as a spirit. But also from a pure alchemy point of view, I've always been amazed, and people often ask about, what helps them give a bigger diversity to their drinks, or what can they have that, they're not just forking out for a bottle to make one drink. And, I keep saying, choose the things that you love, go visit your friendly neighborhood bartender who's going to talk you through a different range of things, and you can try it without having to invest in a full bottle. But the beauty of having a small bottle of absinthe is if you use it in tiny dashes, the amount that it can open up your repertoire of drinks is incredible, but it can also, again, teach you this idea of this care and attention. One of my favorite things to try is a really old recipe of a martini with a spot. So it's a gin martini with a drop of absinthe. Now, I grew up with British cuisine. I didn't actually, until much later on in my life, kind of really develop even a tolerance for anise as a flavour. I grew up despising it as a profile. If there was something aniseedy flavored, I couldn't really kind of track with it. And then you start to notice that a tiny little drop doesn't taste of anise. It actually transforms all the other flavors. To me, a martini with a spot is a very classic profile of a gin martini, because it actually makes the juniper really pop. And, being able to notice the difference that things like that can make, and realize that a cocktail is all about being greater than the sum of its parts. What a cocktail should do is partly kind of do this transformative thing that becomes otherworldly and magical, but also it kind of just helps you to learn to think about how can you do little differences that make a massive effect. And so being able to include absinthe in there and just encourage people not to be terrified of it, and to kind of explore and kind of like reflect on what happens when you use these tiny little additions of things, in a very geeky way. And, I talk in kind of like the bar circles about the importance of flavors that are substrata. So they sit beneath the surface. You're not going to notice them as being, X. I'm trying to think of an example that's not too weird to kind of include in here. But, it's not necessarily about being overtly noticeable, but you really recognize the fact of when it's absent. So it's like, being able to kind of use those kind of magical ingredients, and the kind of surefire one that is the most accessible to people is absinthe. So I really do. It's one that I stand by a lot. And there's, I love white absinthe as a cocktail ingredient. I mean, I think the category is fascinating. There's people doing amazing things across the board, but white absinthe in cocktails, and there's a couple of brands that you can get that are 20 cl bottles. So it's not a huge kind of expense of an outlay, and you're using drops of it. And as long as you're storing it out the light and kind of not with loads of kind of air within it, it's something that will kind of be a good like kind of cocktail staple for you.
I love that, and I wonder if you can cook with it. I'm a big fan of adding vermouth into everything. So next time I'll have to try absinthe. Now I'm going to your table of contents, and it's very gin heavy.
It is.
And I was wondering if that's because you love gin and that's your favorite spirit, or you find that people usually have a bottle of it in the house, or why? I will let you answer that.
It's probably in multiple angles. I think I do love gin, but I think it's also, I suppose it reflects a very classic idea. If you look at historically, the thing that kind of dominated, cocktail culture was white rum, gin, cognac as well, but that's probably like a slightly different era and a different product. But it was, gin was the thing that I noticed most people asked me for recipes for. It was what people were kind of using in their house. yes, of course, even within the trade, vodka still reigns supreme. But I think actually in kind of the home market, I think people have kind of shied away from it. They're not really thinking about the kind of wonders of what vodka can be as its own kind of spirit. So it was kind of trying to have something that was versatile enough that if you look at those recipes, you could sub in a different style of gin, you could sub in a vodka, you could sub in a tequila or a white rum. The profile of them works towards the spirit, and I do believe that that's the thing that we've been kind of noticing the kind of most of in the home space. But it's also giving enough flexibility, and it's teaching them that what happens when you start to kind of include a different spirit here or kind of substitute out that base. So it definitely took the lion's share, but it was again, not trying to be too prescriptive about that.
Now, since you brought up kind of change of tastes, as I said, you had your first book,
Yes.
this one, in 2015, and you've updated, and it's a new edition, a beautiful red edition now. Why did you feel, maybe it was your 10th anniversary, but why did you feel that it was time to update it and, add more cocktails to it and, shake it up a bit?
Honestly, actually, it was a serendipitous kind of timing with the decade. It actually came about from some of the book agents speaking to the publishers. And they had said that there'd been a massive kind of uptick in people making cocktails at home, exactly as we discussed. And they had looked through a range of different kind of like guides that had been out there, and the ones that they had had the strongest resonance with from their perspective and from kind of talking with kind of other bookstores and kind of consumers of it. They said the one that was apparently the most useful was the first book, which was lovely to hear because I wanted it to be something that, I loved seeing dog-eared copies and stained ones where people used it. So to hear that was amazing, and their challenge was that if you knew who we are, people would kind of go, good things to drink with Mr Lyan and friends. I loved that language of it because it was what I saw it as being. But they were like, people don't know it's necessarily a book that teaches you how to make cocktails at home. And, they were like, everything that you've talked about with this book was being very much straightforward, what it says on the tin, and actually the title's quite confusing. So they kind of went, would you make it more straightforward, and we can update some bits and change little bits of kind of content to make it work better for the people that really are looking for kind of a guide to being able to include cocktails at home. And, the thing that they said they loved was it wasn't just a recipe book, there's much more of the philosophy behind it, but the philosophy is about including cocktails at home. So, obviously that's a lovely thing to hear, and, that was so much of the aim of it was to do that. So if there was request for it and people were asking for there to be this kind of this document for a wider audience who didn't currently follow us, it just seemed like a great opportunity to do that. And, it's really nice hearing that, there's been some big lifestyle stores that have taken the book, rather than it just going to kind of like food and drink environments or, of course, bookstores and things like that. It was going into places like Anthropology where people go to, buy a collection of things. They're buying glassware, they're buying, things for their home. They're thinking about it in a different context for it to kind of suit those environments. That was very lovely to hear. So it's been really nice to see kind of the reaction to this update and to hopefully open this up to kind of like a different audience to the ones that knew us from the bar side.
And of the, a billion cocktails you've made in your life, how did you pick the new ones to add into it?
It's actually, that was very tough. It was, because you're right. There's things that we discover. It's always it's a dynamic world. Like, things are shifting. But I think the beauty was trying to look at, again, those occasions, those moments, and try and think on recipes that had enough of a guide to them, but also had enough flexibility to them. So how could we have things that suited those moments and included some kind of new styles of ingredients, new ways of looking at stuff? But again, there's something like I'm thinking of the smoked spite in there. So it's a tea.
Oh, great! Because I was going to ask you if you could,
great.
Expand on one of them.
It's a twist on a drink that's sometimes non-alcoholic, sometimes includes booze, which is a tea and kind of jam base. And, I first had this when I was in Russia and kind of served it as a very homely kind of like, oh, this is a nice soothing drink in from the cold. And it always stuck with me, and, exploring different kind of produce around the world where you find different teas and of course, I love true teas, but there's actually a wealth of products that are becoming more available that sit in that space. Again, people are looking at different ingredients, they're getting access to different ingredients, people are making jams, they're getting much closer to things like farmers markets, but there's also a much wider range of ingredients that are in your local supermarket now. So if you took that base, and it does create this wonderful, soothing, rich drink that is great when it's kind of starting to go cold outside, and it's something you can take on in a flask and go on a big walk with. But giving that idea of going, use whatever you have to hand, whatever's local to you. Don't worry about this being kind of like exactly this. I've suggested these flavor profiles because they suit my kind of view of like those autumnal flavors. But there's absolutely so much freedom in this to use whatever you have in your cupboard or in your fridge. And, you know, that was the nice kind of like guide for including some of the new recipes, was reflecting on those other things that potentially hadn't been included in the book as much before.
Now, I'm kind of a romantic this way. Was there a reason that you ended with white port and tonic, or it just happened that way?
It was purposeful, because that to me was one of the ones that it felt so, again, in people's eyes, highballs are just, they might make a bad gin and tonic for you at your home, and they just kind of think it's a gin and tonic, or it's a highball. It's just what you kind of like mix up for somebody who's coming over. And demonstrating that it could be absolutely magnificent with just a little bit of care, but also straying beyond a kind of... I'm glad to see things like vermouth and kind of some of these other fortifieds of kind of gaining a little bit more, and sherry features heaps in all of the stuff that we do, but starting to kind of gain a little bit more traction, and looking at something like a white port and tonic, which might be in some people's headspace, but some of the people I've suggested to, they're like, I don't even know what that is. And then, then they're saying, oh, as soon as you talk to me about that, I noticed it in the supermarket. It's not an ultra obscure ingredient. It's not something that, you're going to have to fork out loads. It's only for a small circle that's going to be able to afford it. It's lower ABV. It's not super costly. It's something that you can customize. And then as soon as you give it to people, they're like, that's magnificent. And, that to me was like a lovely finishing drink of just going... It breaks expectations, it's accessible, but it's really going to deliver to people into something, feels their own, but still feels like it has a massive impact. And that to me was like a beautiful summation of everything that we were trying to do with the book.
Oh, well, that is such a wonderful way to end, I have to say. With the, I love white port and tonic, and it's something that actually I had in Portugal, and you reminded me to drink it.
Oh, so good.
So, yeah. And I was like, why am I not drinking that? Of course. I love that that's the end. Now, I'm just going to look back at my notes. I think we've gone through everything, which is fabulous.
Oh, so glad.
So, unless there's something else that you want to tell me about the book that I didn't ask, I'd love to hear it.
No, I think it was a lovely discussion to be able to go through the... something that's been very personal. So I really appreciate the questions, because it helps you to kind of like reflect on something. Inevitably with kind of publishing, it's quite a big process, lots of different steps involved. So you deliver it to the kind of like publishers, and you go through with the editors, and you get it all together. But then there's this gap before it kind of starts to come out into the world, and there's another phase of emotion when you get to kind of talk to people about it. And it's really nice when people are as thoughtful as you were about kind of some of the reasons behind it. So it's lovely to be able to talk about that. But, the kind of feelings behind it were really very genuine. I obviously, I work in the world of cocktails, so I'm going to be biased about it. But, being able to kind of use these books as a way of kind of talking to more people about that, and to try and demonstrate how impactful it can be to do these things. It doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to have lots of equipment, or, go out and buy this giant cocktail cabinet. All of these things that a lot of my friends have seen as barriers, the book tries to kind of dispel those and break it down and go, listen, you can do it with whatever you have in your house. Use the ingredients you have already. You don't need to make this complicated. You just need to be able to think on what are you trying to create for the people around you at that moment. And, I'm really hopeful that this does help that kind of idea get to kind of a load more people, because it's something that I really genuinely believe in. And, it's lovely to see when people kind of come back around and, make one of these drinks or make it their own, and they, put it in front of their friends, and it's unexpected, and everybody just ends up feeling, it kicks off a discussion, or, it kind of breaks down like a moment to make it feel more relaxed. I do love hearing those. So it's, whenever anybody tags me in like a photo on Instagram and they're like, oh, I made this from this book, it's genuinely something that truly warms my heart, because it's like, oh, it worked. That's what it was for. It wasn't, yes, of course, it's nice to be able to do this as an exercise, and writing a book is a wonderful thing to be able to do from a creative point of view, but it's really only real until when people connect it from the other side. So yeah, it was a labor of love. It is something I cared immensely about. But I want it to work for people. That's the main thing for me.
Well, it definitely does. Now, usually I have 2 final questions, and I usually ask for the top tip for the home bartender. But I think the top tip the top tip would be to buy your book.
Oh, that's very sweet. But I mean, I think the top tip is just to kind of think on, like, take that moment to reflect on what you love and what you're trying to do with whatever you're making. If it's for a gift, if it's for a special occasion, if it's for your date night, as soon as you start to just take that moment to reflect and think about those parameters, and that sounds really easy, but often we just get swept up with, oh, this is the thing that fits that, or, I found this recipe and I've been told that that's what's special. It's not. It's all about just kind of like thinking on for yourself, what do you want the moment or that emotion to be? And the more care you put into that, the more magical it's going to be.
Oh, absolutely. Now, last but not least, I love to hear this because I feel like I really get to know the person this way. But if you could be drinking anything anywhere right now, what would it be and where would it be?
Ooh. Well, it's just started raining here. And even though it's a very lovely view looking out, on London, where there's the greenery and this light, but it would be very lovely to be. I was actually thinking about some of the friends who can't join us for our kind of decade celebrations that are coming up in a very short time, and actually being probably in Australia, because that's where the bulk of my family and some very, very dear friends are. And being able to be there toasting with something that was like truly tropical, because some of the ingredients I got to try out there, that would be a deliciously fruity take on a margarita, or something that feels very kind of island celebration, would be wonderful right now, and that would be a very lovely toast to be able to do with some dear friends and family.
Yes, and I was going to mention that, a toast to you, and I can't wait to see what you do in the next 10 years, because you've been so influential for these past 10 years that, like, the sky is your limit.
That's
really.
Very sweet. It feels very exciting kind of having kind of reflected on this kind of 10-year point, but to still have that feeling that we're only just getting started. So I'm very excited. We've got such an amazing crew, and they're doing such brilliant things that I kind of retain that excitement around it all, and yeah, I can't wait to see what we're able to do next.
Absolutely. So, and everyone, head to Lyaness or any of the Lyan bars that are near you. All right?
Thank you.
And thank you so much for spending this hour with me. It's been really great to go through your book and learn about your flavor relationship and you as an educator.
Thank you. It's been an absolute joy. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.